Hello, and welcome back to our fifth annual New Year Wellness Series, packed with meaningful guidance on spiritual, relational, emotional, nutritional, physical, and mental wellness. The Robin Rubin Center for Happiness and Life Enhancement is pleased to co-sponsor this event with the Marcus Institute of Integrative Health at FAU Medicine. Integrative health is a holistic, patient-focused approach to healthcare and wellness. At the Marcus Institute, our physicians treat the whole person by examining everything that makes up a patient's health, including factors that can lead to disease, impact nutrition, exercise, and stress. Ultimately, patients and physicians are partners in healing and wellness. We're posting links in the chat now and invite you to learn more about the Robin Rubin Center and the Marcus Institute and make plans to join us again in the future. My name is Sarah Green. I'm the wellness consultant with the Marcus Institute of Integrative Health, and it is my honor today to welcome Dr. Branson Collins, our medical director at the Marcus Institute of Integrative Health. Dr. Collins is a triple board certified physician who is board certified in anesthesiology, pain management, anti-aging, and regenerative medicine. In addition to being a spinal and musculoskeletal interventional expert, he also applies the principles of integrative medicine to optimize the health and well-being of his patients. Dr. Collins received his Bachelor of Arts in Biology at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, and completed his Doctor of Medicine at UMDNJ, New Jersey Medical School. He was chief resident at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Hospital, where he completed his residency in anesthesiology, as well as an advanced fellowship in pain management. He also is an advanced fellowship trained physician in anti-aging, metabolic, and functional medicine through the American Academy of Anti-Aging and Regenerative Medicine. Dr. Collins has served his country proudly as a veteran in the New Jersey Army National Guard, and he is a resident of Boca Raton, Florida. It is truly my honor to welcome Dr. Branson Collins. Thank you, Dr. Collins.
Thank you so much for the beautiful introduction. I'm going to share my screen here. And thank you everybody for being on the call today. I wanted to really just give an overview of what we're doing in integrative medicine and what integrative really means as it relates to really treating and the whole person. A lot of times in today's medical paradigm, the whole person may not be treated as optimally as we would like. And with an integrative approach, we use evidence-based medicine to really treat holistically, looking at the mind, body, and spirit, and also adding a functional approach that really does a lot of precise laboratory analysis to really optimize why the people are coming to us to really get them well and help reverse disease. So I just wanted to start off by really defining integrative and functional medicine. And there's a distinction. And some people have heard about functional medicine and many have heard about an integrative approach. In the functional approach, really the functional medicine is aligning with understanding how disease begins and that disease itself is an endpoint of dysfunction in processes. The change in function throughout time can move forward or backwards, and it's really determined by how an individual's genes interact with their environment, including diet and lifestyle. In functional approach to medicine, the practitioner is less concerned with the actual disease, but really more concerned with the processes that have resulted in the disease presentation. So in this integrative approach, is very patient-centered. It's looking at the root cause analysis as to why people are experiencing what they are. It also is looking at the balance between how genes are influenced by our environmental factors. And it personalizes this approach because each individual has biochemical, social factors that are very individualized to them. It also promotes the preservation of organs and also works to really sustain and maintain a health span because there's lifespan, which is the years living, and then there's health span, which we really seek to make sure that people are living into their 70s, 80s, and 90s, functioning at a high level. And also, we really foster a very positive environment that we're not victims to our genes. We do have a major ability to really influence our genes to work for us and not against us. And then we really look at focusing on the function and not as much as the pathology itself. I really like this slide because it really does show that there's an interplay between what creates disease, and a lot of the basis of it really comes down to inflammation. So even things that are cardiovascular in nature, cancers, even depression and mental health conditions, there's there's a cellular element where the body is out of balance and as it relates to inflammation. And we see it distinctly in the rise in autoimmune diseases and also even in neurodegenerative conditions such as Alzheimer's. You can see on the left side that diet will influence this, physical inactivity, chronic stress, which is something that we'll touch upon the influence of that, and how that disturbs sleep. And also, a big factor that we look at in an integrative approach is people are really exposed to certain toxins over time that can accumulate. There's ways to measure those and really optimize through diet, exercise to really help our body get rid of toxins, which can really contribute to making that chronic inflammation worse over time. So I want to really discuss about, the Rosetta Stone of aging. It really comes down to how our cells are responding to stressors. And one of the major powerhouses of the cell are called mitochondria. And these mitochondria have really been looked at in literature to really determine when people live into their hundreds, what is happening there. And a lot of it is that their mitochondria are actually functioning at a high level. So we know that these mitochondria that are in the cells, they're very, very vulnerable to stressors. And as we get exposed to toxins, as we get exposed to different stressors over time, there's a lot of stress that happens at the level of the cell, and that can present itself as cardiovascular issues, nervous system issues. And also, how does this interplay with how we fuel our bodies? So we know that the American diet, as we'll go into in following slides, we say that it's not nutrient dense, especially the standard American diet. And many Americans are overfed in terms of calories, but undernourished in terms of the quality of those calories. So if we look at the standard American diet, really it traces back 10,000 years. There's an increase in animal and grain consumption during this period. And what ended up happening was there's excess consumption of calories from refined carbohydrates like sugars, bad fats like saturated fats were added, excessive sodium was added to food. And overall, what happened over time is there was an overall lack of nutrients, which are often found in whole grains, fruits, and vegetables. So as we look forward into the 50s, what ended up happening was the average caloric intake increased in the late 50s significantly from 1900 to about 2660 calories per day. Refined grains and fats were added and contributed to the greatest increase in calories in the 1950s. And then sugars were added to really make things palatable. And over time, also preservatives were added for shelf life. So if we look at what's happening now, Americans aren't consuming as much fresh vegetables as are needed. We're getting more starchy vegetables like potatoes, which tend to dominate the American average daily caloric intake. And these starchy vegetables can actually spike blood sugar and actually lead to things like diabetes, especially when it's not balanced well by other factors like having enough nutrients and antioxidants from vegetables. And these overconsumption of calories really led to an increase in heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and cancer. And this was combined with low fruit and vegetable intake in those in the lower one-fourth of the population experienced about twice increased risk of cancer compared with those who had high intake of fruits and vegetables. So we know that there's an interface between diet, good fruit and vegetable intake, and even mitigating cancer. So what challenges us in the modern day? Your standard American diet now is more processed. There's lower nutrients, per unit food, and it impacts the overall quality of the nutrition. We're also consuming too many calories, and there's more nutrient deficiencies. Nutrient deficiencies are one of those things that because we're very resilient as humans, people can be unoptimized in terms of their nutrient status, things like vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin D, but still continue to live and go about their day. But in terms of how optimal they're feeling, in terms of actually how it contributes over time to stressors on their system, over time, that lack of nutrient optimization has impacts on aging and also can lead to that chronic inflammation we discussed. And also, there's been this misconception as it relates to when people look on the back of their food boxes, on their even on their nutrient supplements and vitamins, and there's something called the recommended daily allowance. Now, generally, the recommended daily allowance and safe upper limits offer a broad advice, but overlook that there's an individual metabolic need, and there's also genetic differences in terms of which nutrients. Some people need more Bs than others. Some people need a different form of B vitamins. And there's a lot of individual metabolic variation in terms of how the person can absorb those. And really what we're seeking now is we're really looking at personalized nutritional approaches with testing, looking at genetics, to really optimize and be very personalized as to what one person should be eating to really optimize themselves versus another. And I've done significant amount of genetic testing even within families, and you can see genetic variation even from mothers to children, where one child may have lactose intolerance and not tolerate dairy. Another one of the children may actually be gluten sensitive. And that's within the same family, but many families, aren't making individualized meals for each person in their family. So there's this balance of knowledge is power in that sense, but also that just because something is happening to one child doesn't necessarily mean that that same thing is happening to the other child. They can be very different even within families. So, with this integrative wellness, we really seek from the beginning of our experience working with our patients to do more root cause analysis. So, we want to look and say, okay, what kind of genetic predisposition is there? Are there any triggers that we can identify early on that may have led to things like autoimmunity or to the blood pressure not being well controlled or even having insulin resistance? So, we look at early life influences, where there are traumatic events, where there are trigger events or stressors that may have actually led to inflammation cascading. So one of the key questions that I always do is I look and see, well, what are we missing? Foundationally, we look at lifestyle. And we also have to look at the emotional, social, and also spiritual aspect of wellness. And what I see when I think of wellness like a wheel. And for one person, spirituality may need to be 30% of their wellness wheel for them to feel content. And for another person, that may only be 15%. And that also goes to social interactions, and it also goes to certain lifestyle things. Some people genetically need more sleep than others. And it's really good to identify what each person needs to really be optimized. And we take a lot of time with the people that we take care of to really personalize the approach. So we look at the nutrient status, their hormone balance, including their stress hormone, and we look at their sleep. Are they actually recovering? So we'll measure things like the balance of their rest and relaxed nervous system to their fight or flight nervous system. And there's different monitors that people may have come across nowadays. One of which is, people may have seen things like the Oura Ring, show up in commercials, and that's actually a device that looks at the balance between the fight or flight nervous system and the rest and relax in something called HRV. Another thing is that physical activity. More and more, we're actually looking at how exercise also needs to be individualized. And as we age through decades, how we exercised when we were 19 years old likely should be very different than how we're exercising when we're 40 years old. Like some of the need to do more high intensity things may not be as beneficial in 40s and 50s. Some people actually can tolerate that well, while other people should be focusing more on things like yoga and Pilates and actually not doing as high intensity things. And that's why when we're looking at people's hormones, one of the things we'll look at is their cortisol curve. And for instance, if somebody has high cortisol all throughout the day because they're stressed at home, they're stressed executive, they're stressed because of social issues, you'll find that sometimes the exercises they go towards are things that are high intensity that actually will spike their cortisol more. And what we know is that over time, high cortisol over time can actually have effects where it actually increases likelihood of injury and also increases likelihood of things like autoimmunity. So these are things that we track over time, and we really personalize all these things. The other part is really community and connection, love, meaning, and purpose. And we saw during the pandemic that people felt isolated, and isolation, because we are supposed to be tribal type beings in our history. That sense of community is very important for wellness. So we get all that history. Um, was somebody in their birth history, were they C-section or vaginal delivery? Did their mother have a lot of stress while they were in utero? And that we've seen that actually has genetic effects on the children even before they're born. And we see associations between things like how robust, the gut microbiome is. And if they go through a vaginal delivery, they tend to actually have a more robust, diverse microbiome, which we associate it with wellness. While C-section, because we're not going through the vaginal canal, the microbiome in the gut is actually less diverse, which in and of itself we're finding can actually increase risk for autoimmunity and also increase risk for other chronic inflammatory things. Um, Going all the way back to where they breastfed so that we know what kind of immunoglobulins they were exposed to. And also in childhood, when I get somebody's history, I'll ask how they were as a kid. Did they have chronic sinus infections? Did they have a lot of allergies? Did they have irritability? Did they have migraines? And you can figure out then if there's certain triggers that were happening either through food allergies or if there was antibiotic exposure early, which also we know can disrupt normal kind of microbiome balance, which has impact on things like diabetes, hypertension, more than we realized, 20 years ago. So when we look at triggers, as we were discussing with the standard American diet, we find because of the processed food and also the chemicals that it can be associated with that processed food, that at times people aren't necessarily reacting to the dairy or the wheat that's in the product itself. They may be more reacting to some of the hormones that the dairy was actually made with, and also some of the chemicals that the wheat was exposed to before it was harvested. So in general, when somebody is having things like autoimmunity, things like rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, and even if we look at things like chronic pain issues like fibromyalgia, diabetes, things like endometriosis, we're actually finding that those have an immune component where the person's own immune system actually is attacking itself. So in this integrative approach, we actually will identify through food allergy panels and also through elimination of certain things like grains and dairy. We get them on kind of a plant-based, gluten-free diet if they so need, because that can be the difference between gut health and also has downstream effects on cognition. And what we find in people that do have these sensitivities, that even small indiscretions where they get exposed to things like gluten once a week can be enough to actually increase their autoimmunity risk. And this is all in literature and actually is just gaining more and more literature support. So it's really crossing over into the mainstream medicine more. So a lot of times we'll actually eliminate and go a very low inflammatory diet for about 30 days to allow the body to heal and reset. And then we'll reintroduce some of these potential triggers, things like peanuts, dairy, things like that, and actually have people track if they're actually having symptoms. And I have this conversation with my patients all the time that the lucky people are the people that actually are having a sensitive reaction to food and they're getting a GI effect. They get a little bit of abdominal discomfort. They get a little bit of indigestion. Their bowel habits change because oftentimes that can be associated with, oh, I ate something and now my stomach just doesn't feel right. The challenge that we have, because there's different kinds of immune response to different foods, sometimes it can present as joint pain. Sometimes it could present as brain fog and cognitive, lack of sharpness. And that can actually happen 2 or 3 days after the exposure. So we tease out in our histories very well how we can actually figure out what may be triggering somebody so we can allow their body to be in a state of healing. The other thing we do is we replace and reinoculate the body and the gut. We give appropriate fiber because the American diet is really low on fiber comparatively because of the lack of vegetables and legumes and things like that. We'll also give them certain supplements to actually help their pancreas and their gallbladder and to actually help them digest food because there's some people more than others may produce these enzymes more, and we can also test those things. And also giving probiotics back to the gut. And then we use nutrients to help repair. And typically, this whole process, once we identify that there's certain triggers, um, we work on the removal, the repair, and typically the repair portion is about 3 months to really help restore that. We look for nutrient deficiencies, things like omega-3s and fish oils, and that's why looking at the American diet, oftentimes we're not getting as much fish. And also genetically, some people, even if they are consuming fish, they actually don't extract the omega-3s from the fish as much as others. So we'll actually do some genetic testing to determine if somebody has that change where they actually could utilize more support with the fatty acids. And these are actually seen as stabilizing for cells. So they're very good anti-inflammatories that are natural. They're very supportive for natural processes of the liver and kidneys. So as opposed to some of the pharmaceuticals like the ibuprofens, which are often used as anti-inflammatories, those actually have the opposite effects on the cells, where they can help with inflammation, but they're also causing more stress on the gastrointestinal system as opposed to things like the natural kind of fish oils, which actually help balance out the inflammation naturally. And another factor is that we're very sunshine deficient in the United States. And I remember practicing pain management in the Northwest. And when I started looking at literature about how often chronic pain was associated with vitamin D being deficient, I just started measuring people's vitamin D levels. And I was finding that about 80% at least of my chronic pain patients were vitamin D deficient. And then I'm cross-referencing that to, okay, what is there science to kind of back that can be associated? And there certainly is. And as I started repleting their vitamin D appropriately by giving them physiologic activated vitamin D, their chronic pain was improving. And also we were seeing improvements of mood and sleep, and some of these aches and pains and recovery were improving. And also as it relates to things like stress puts a lot of strain on our B vitamins. And these B vitamins are, B12 gets a lot of press, but there's B2, B6, folate. And what we know is genetically, about 50% of individuals actually need an activated form of these nutrients in order to absorb them. So we actually test to see, are you within that 50% that actually needs these activated forms? And then we measure, and we also make sure that the person is actually not getting too much or too little. And that can help things like dopamine production in the brain, serotonin, and these kind of happy hormones. And when we're looking in the mental health space, if you look at things like antidepressants, like SSRIs, like Effexors and Prozac, these agents work by, you know, taking and preventing the breakdown of the serotonin, which is really one of the happy neurotransmitters for the brain. But when you look at things like serotonin, that whole pathway actually needs B vitamins to actually function appropriately. So when I always look at root cause, I always ask myself, does this person have fundamentally what their body needs to actually heal itself and to actually be in balance? So you can give a pharmaceutical, but if you're not actually treating the pathway to actually make sure that that individual has what their body needs to actually support their natural processes, then we may not get the outcomes that we want from some of these pharmaceuticals. Um, so, we touched on it earlier, but another thing in integrative approach to wellness is we're really looking at this concept of microbiome. And we know that diverse beneficial bacteria, especially, are associated with wellness, and that people who have more diverse and beneficial bacteria in their gut, they tend to actually have less autoimmunity, they tend to have less mood disorders, they have less chronic pain. So a healthy gut contains a wide variety of beneficial bacteria. A lot of people have heard of lactobacillus and bifido. And overall, we're actually seeing that people who have these balanced probiotics oftentimes have better mood, better resiliency. And we're finding that when we see imbalances of certain microbiome patterns, that's actually associated with obesity and associated with hyperlipidemia and lipids and high blood pressure. So when this imbalance, when the bad players in the gut are kind of in too high of a number compared to the good players, it's something called dysbiosis. And we see now that dysbiosis can actually trigger autoimmunity. It's been correlated with neurodegenerative conditions like multiple sclerosis, and also Alzheimer's, ALS. And it also is associated with just the cardiac and cardiometabolic system being more inflamed and leading to potentially more cardiac stress. So overall, probiotics can be used therapeutically. We look at food first as medicine, where again, we look for that plant-based Mediterranean style diet, which actually has high amount of phytonutrients from vegetables, good fruit intake, healthy fats, and that naturally will feed the good bacteria. And we find that when we're working to manage obesity, insulin resistance, and even things like liver diseases, that outcomes are improving. And along with that, some things like asparagus and those kind of natural vegetables, our body, our human cells actually don't metabolize those. It's actually the organisms in our gut that actually are metabolizing those. And they're the ones that are breaking it down for us to actually utilize for our own cells and for our own cell energy. So these prebiotics nourish the beneficial gut bacteria, helping to maintain a balanced microbiome and promote digestive and overall wellness. And together, these probiotics and prebiotics can help prevent and manage various health conditions to support a healthy gut ecosystem. So I want to, discuss on, some of how we look at this personalized approach to when people come to us with things. We know that insulin resistance is ultimately what makes somebody have diabetes. And diabetes is really a metabolic disorder, which is caused by one of our organs, the pancreas, its inability to release insulin, which is another hormone, or the muscles are becoming insulin, aren't as sensitive to insulin and they become resistant. And that's actually one of the most common reasons that somebody develops diabetes. And it's predicted to rise from 171 million cases back from 2000 and 2010 to by 2030, we anticipate 366 million cases of diabetes. And we know diabetes is associated with increased risk of cancer. We know that diabetes is associated with increased risk of things like Alzheimer's. And we're looking at things like Alzheimer's as, almost like a type 3 diabetes. If somebody is having resistance to their blood sugar getting into the cell, which is where it needs to go, then their brain, because it needs so much energy, is actually one of the initial organs to really, or the primary organs that really can have dysfunction secondary to that. Now, is there a link between diabetes and the microbiome? And there is. We've seen that the altered gut microbiome and diabetes is linked to significant changes in the gut microbiome. And also the integrity of the gut itself seems to be disrupted. And as I was discussing earlier, this integrity of the gut really is one of those factors that can lead to whether or not somebody will trigger an autoimmune response. So if somebody has a family history of something like rheumatoid arthritis, we know that if their gut and their junctions of their gut are more permeable, that they're more likely to actually trigger autoimmune phenomenon. And there's various reasons for that. And also there's certain molecules that are coming from our gut bacteria that our immune system is actually geared to create a reaction to. One of those is called LPS, and people have heard about things like E. coli food poisoning. And E. coli is an organism that is one of our organisms that is in our gut to a certain extent. And it actually is, when it's at good levels, it can actually coexist with everything else. But when it's high and the gut's leaky, what happens is the immune system actually creates a reaction almost as if somebody actually is having a low-grade food poisoning. But this is happening at kind of a molecular level, but it's presenting itself in some people more than others as a trigger and perpetuation of things like their autoimmunity, their cognitive dysfunction, and it also impacts other aspects of their life. And these autoantibodies drive inflammation, and in this case, the autoimmunity associated with diabetic patients. So, looking at the impact of diet, low carbohydrate, high protein diets can improve, our average blood sugar. We educate our patients on how each food has a different, what's called glycemic index, as it relates to how much this particular food can spike their blood sugar. So another thing we do in our genetic testing is some people actually can tolerate white breads better than kind of the whole grain breads. Those people that can tolerate well when they consume white bread, they actually don't spike their insulin or blood sugar as much. But for majority of people or many people, when they consume non-whole grains, they actually will spike their blood sugar. And we're actually finding now that getting more data with things like continuous glucose monitors can be very, very helpful. Where instead of just waiting for that one time a year or twice a year to check something like a hemoglobin A1C, which is really an average of 3 months of how the blood sugar was, what we'll do is we'll have people who we suspect, either through genetic testing history, have insulin resistance. And we'll actually put them on a continuous glucose monitor for at least 14 days, where they actually check their blood sugar, using a phone app multiple times a day. So we can actually see, well, what's spiking your blood sugar? And also, is your blood sugar actually dipping? Are you actually having moments where you're actually getting low blood sugar? And I can't tell you how many times I've been taking care of patients who thought they were having panic attacks. And when we get a continuous glucose monitor on them, the times where they were actually having these panic moments, they were actually hypoglycemic. And we weren't catching, their other doctors weren't catching this in their hemoglobin A1C because it was showing up normal. So this is just one of the ways that we use our knowledge in integrative medicine to really personalize and optimize so we get as much data as we can to really individualize each approach. So along with that, moving forward, looking at cardiovascular disease, and cardiovascular disease really refers to a group of disorders: heart disease, cerebral vascular disease, which increases risk of stroke; peripheral vascular disease, which can lead to problems with blood flow to extremities, and also problems with clotting. And cardiovascular diseases are the #1 cause of death globally and account for 1/3 of all deaths. So certainly, if we can actually do a better preventative, integrative approach to somebody's cardiovascular health, then we can actually make a major positive change for them in terms of mitigating their risk of having a major cardiovascular event that's negative for them. And there's going to be differences in susceptibility to cardiovascular disease based on genetics, ethnicity, and also the environments that we find ourselves in. So when we're looking at really optimizing somebody for their cardiovascular status, again, we're looking at their genetics, we're looking at their what's called the nutrigenomics, which enables us to customize their diet based on their genetic predisposition and enhancing the cardiovascular disease prevention. And that's the concept of, just because somebody has a family history of cardiovascular disease doesn't mean that those genes have to be activated. When we exercise, we actually downregulate some of those cardiovascular genes that are bad for us. When we eat high fiber, when we have good antioxidant status, those genes that otherwise would promote diabetes or promote cardiovascular disease are actually turned off. And it can go the other way if somebody is smoking tobacco, not sleeping well, not exercising. Those genes that they may be predisposed to for some of those cardiovascular disease issues are actually activated. And that's something called nutrigenomics, and also what's called epigenetics. So we're finding more and more now that we're not necessarily a victim of our genetics. We just have to learn what our genetics are, get precise data to figure out what plan we need to put in place. Hypertension has a genetic component. Cancer, we'll talk on that. In terms of an integrative approach to preventing cancer, or even assisting with our oncology colleagues in terms of how they're managing cancer, we know that cancer is the leading cause of death for women worldwide. Incidence of 9.2 million cases, with 4.4 million deaths per year from cancer. The risk factors are genetic, chemical exposures, which we can evaluate and really seek to help people with getting rid of toxins, hormone imbalances, smoking, And there's modifiable risk factors. If somebody has obesity, low physical activity, they're not getting enough fruits and vegetables, excess alcohol. And that's a big one that, socially in the United States, alcohol has become very prevalent in terms of our social engagements. And this is challenging for many people, where if you're going out and you're socializing, that it's just common practice to let's, get a bottle of wine and share it. And I always point out to our patients, one will do genetic testing to see what their tolerance for alcohol is. Some people really genetically don't break down alcohol well. So for them, if it's for women, they can have 1 glass of alcohol per day to not go past being excess. If they do two, it's actually excess. Um, and for men, 2 drinks of alcohol in a 24-hour period, anything beyond there is excess. If somebody has certain genetics, 1 drink for them or half a drink can actually be past there would be excessive. So it's good to know that information because then you can, it's not that you have to completely cessate from alcohol, but smaller portions, taking your time with drinking it, enjoying it, and doing it in a social environment can be very, very helpful. So regular consumption of fruits and vegetables, nutrients. We do vitamin testing. We make sure we give high quality nutrients based on that objective data, minerals. And we find that doing these things can help reduce the risk of cervical cancer. And this is in literature that it helps prevent proliferation of cancer cells and prevents DNA damage. We talked a little bit about some of the genes involved with B vitamins, and we'll test actually certain things on top of just their B vitamins. We'll also look at their feedback to really optimize their B vitamin status. And I touched on it before, but basically this Mediterranean diet really is high in fruit and vegetables, beans, legumes, nuts, fish, cereals, grains, and olive oil. It's plant-based. It's low in meat and low in dairy, low in saturated fats, and it's non-processed, so it's whole foods. And there's so many studies looking at cardiovascular protection as well as protection against cancer. And this is all why integrative medicine really is leading the way as evidence-based approach to holistic care. So enhanced cardiovascular health, reduce diabetes risk. So we empower our patients through personalized nutrition to make individualized choices. We tailor it to help with their disease management, and we really seek to have better outcomes using food first, in a very personalized and objective way. And just also discussing one of our big wellness pillars, sleep, that we know sleep is one of the major things that we have for my clients that complain about sleep. We know that sleep deficiency leads to inflammation, and that this inflammation over time can actually promote them to age faster, to not recover, for their brain not to heal as it should during sleep, and also affects all hormones. And I wanted to end the talk just discussing about, the fight or flight nervous system, and also that the other part of that nervous system is the rest and relax nervous system. And in today's society, a lot of people are overstressed, which is why we look at their cortisol, we talk about stress reduction and do things to monitor that. But we're also really looking at how can we activate people's rest and relax nervous system. And we know this vagus nerve is really important for, you know, um, pain. It's really important for how our organs are functioning and our gut, temperature regulation. The GI tract has tons of fibers for this vagus nerve. And we know that this vagus nerve, when it's overdriven by the fight or flight, can end up actually having downstream effects where behavior is affected, cognition is affected, and also the vagus nerve is a really important first line defense against inflammation. So we're actually looking at ways where we can stimulate the vagus nerve. So there's auricular approaches where there's a device you can put to stimulate your vagus nerve, either in the ear or you stimulate it right over where it runs, right where that pulse is in the neck. And we're actually finding that we can actually help people's stress hormone with that, and also that it has downstream effects in lowering inflammation. And we're also doing an approach where we're doing injections, where we're actually blocking the fight or flight nervous system for a short period of time, doing something called a stellate ganglion block, which we're actually seeing is helping in post-traumatic stress disorder. We're seeing it help in generalized anxiety disorder and also executive functioning, because over time, stress as a stressor on the system accumulates over time. So anything we can do to activate the rest and relax nervous system and calm down that fight or flight nervous system can only be helpful for people's longevity. So we see that if we stimulate the vagal nerve, that this was a study done in Europe, which actually looked at the positive effect of the vagus nerve stimulation on improving depression, with a response rate at 33% and actually a remission of 17%. After 1 year of treatment, the response rate reached 53% and the remission rate 33%. I mean, these are tremendously positive numbers with just doing a stimulation of really the restless nervous system. We also see it associated with inflammation and autoimmunity, and that when the vagus nerve is actually stimulated, that autoimmunity and chronic inflammation that's not that's autoimmune in nature actually can be improved. I want to thank you for your time today, and I'm happy to take a couple questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Collins. I've listened to Dr. Collins speak countless times, and I leave every single time having learned something so valuable. I'm confident everyone else here has as well. Before we go to our open Q&A, we are going to take a moment and ask everyone to fill out a survey that's being posted in the chat box. We appreciate your feedback. It will literally take 1 minute, and it's really helpful. So I'll give you just a moment to do that. And then if it's okay, while everyone's filling out the survey, Dr. Collins, I'm actually going to lead with a question and then we'll open the floor. So I think really quite pertinent to this series because we are collaborating with the Robin Rubin Center for Happiness and Fulfillment and the School of Social Work. I want to touch on mental health, and you talked about the prevalence of alcohol in social situations. And, we talk a lot about what they do in the blue zones and the Power Nine, and that it's not that alcohol is completely taboo, but it's done so in a very healthy setting while connecting with loved ones and over a meal. But I want to speak to, or allow you to speak to, the genetic testing that you talked about. I don't know if it is pertinent to bring in the idea about MTHFR, but I know there is also a correlation between how the body metabolizes alcohol for those of us with MTHFR genetic mutations. And if you could speak for a moment to our audience about where they might be able to learn more about that genetic testing or any other information that might be supportive of that. We are in January, it's just about to end, but I know many people participate in Dry January, which I think is great for that like New Year motivation resolution idea. But I, for one, as a healthcare professional, really pride myself on working with people for long-term behavior, sustainable behavior change. So like when January's over, it's not like I was dry, so I get to celebrate and drink in February. It's how can we then sustain those behavior changes that will contribute to better health outcomes, longevity, et cetera.
And thank you, Sarah. I appreciate the question. It's there's some interesting things that are shifting in society, and one of which reports are coming out that the younger generation is actually drinking less alcohol, right? So I think it's there's a social shift happening. And when we're doing things like our genetic testing, our medical genetic testing at the Marcus Institute, we actually one of the markers that we look at is actually how your body breaks down alcohol as a toxin. And what we'll find is some people actually rapidly metabolize it, and those people that do, they can actually be more in the moderation aspect of things where they're not going to have as many hangovers. And when I say those things of hangovers, hangovers are a spectrum, right? So many people may know this, the classic hangover of like your splitting headache and you're no energy. But the reality is we find that hangovers can be as subtle as just the brain not being as sharp the next day, reaction time not being as sharp. And the people that actually metabolize alcohol more slowly, it's very good to know because not only can they tolerate less alcohol, but they're more likely to actually have liver damage, more likely to actually get liver cirrhosis and end-stage liver issues, and also more likely to develop alcohol dependency and addiction, right? So, and it's powerful to see people's eyes when you're going over the testing with them, and it kind of empowers them to say, if I want to make that change, like, and also there's an interesting part too. The people who have bad alcohol genetics or alcohol genetics where they don't metabolize as well, they also have increased risk of cancers, colon cancer, breast cancer. And that actually does correlate with things like your B vitamin metabolism and that MTHFR, because if we look at alcohol as a toxin, what happens is it depletes. one of our major antioxidants in our liver called glutathione. And as glutathione goes down, the liver becomes more fatty. And people who have MTHFR, that is actually a very important pathway for their estrogen metabolism. And the estrogen metabolism really is associated with there's good estrogen metabolites that promote wellness and longevity. And then there's estrogen metabolites that promote cancer, cardiovascular disease, right? So we look at all those things as it relates to how are patients, both men and women, by the way, breaking down their estrogen. We look at their methylation status, and we actually help them to really optimize those things so that they can really make more conscious choices. And the proof is in how they feel. I can't tell you how many people we've gone over these things with, and they just minimize alcohol where it used to be part of a regular kind of behavior for them. And now it's just rare, special occasions, maybe just half a glass, enjoying it in a social environment, which is, we know is healthier when you're doing things like that in a social environment, not isolated. And they feel like their brain's working better. We even see it in terms of brain scans. When we look at brain scans and how the blood flow is for the brain, when people actually have alcohol on board and it's on a regular basis, even 3 times a week, twice a week, their entire brain becomes hypometabolic globally, meaning that their ability to fire synapses, their ability to actually think quickly, their ability for their chemical transmission to happen at a rapid rate is actually diminished. And when we can see those changes, and when people stop alcohol for 6 months, in many cases completely reverses, where they're like those synapses are firing on all cylinders. And it's great to look at it and just say, oh, look at that cool picture. We can see that everything's nice and green and flowing now. But when you get the reports back and people are like, oh, I'm writing a book now. I'm actually, doing all these artistic things, right? So it's pretty incredible. And that's why we really are passionate about what we do.
Thank you so much. I just dropped in the chat box. Dr. Collins is accepting new patients. If you're interested in connecting with him further or making a new patient appointment, you can email the Marcus Institute. We have just another moment or two. Do we have any questions from our attendees? If you have a question, you can go ahead and unmute, turn your video on. Feel free to join us. Okay, wonderful. Well, I know it's a lot of information to process, so I'm sure we'll be getting a bunch of emails like we did last time. And Dr. Collins does regularly speak at the Marcus Institute, so you can go online and view the schedule there for upcoming events or join our email database. This really has been such a pleasure. Like I said, I always learn so very much from you. We are just about out of time, so thank you all for being here, particularly to Dr. Collins. Thank you for taking time to join us for the 5th annual New Year Wellness Series. We hope that you have gained valuable tools and insight to support your health and well-being. And remember, every small step towards wellness counts. And